Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. In a world, drowning in passwords, paper forms, endless KYC, know your customer checks, who do you really trust more to manage your fundamental digital identity? Is it the government, which, let's be honest, has a bit of a track record with large-scale software projects?
Or is it the sprawling network of private companies already scanning your face online for various services? It's a tough question.
It really is. Today, we're unpacking a policy area that has been a historical third rail in the UK, the renewed and, yes, highly controversial attempt to build a national digital identity system.
It's a massive political and technical gamble, huge stakes.
Right. So our mission today is to analyze the compelling case for why Britain, arguably, desperately needs this system, but also to challenge the current political framing that seems to be, actively destroying public trust before it even gets going.
And maybe zero in on the specific design choices, because those choices really determine whether this whole thing becomes a convenience upgrade or, something much worse, a surveillance nightmare, potentially.
Exactly. So the government set a pretty firm marker, didn't they? What was the immediate pitch?
It was remarkably firm, maybe surprisingly so. They're insisting that by the end of this current Parliament summer 2029 digital ID will be mandatory for all right-to-work checks.
Mandatory.
Mandatory for that specific purpose. They also say it will be available to all citizens and legal residents, but the Prime Minister explicitly tied the headline goal to preventing illegal working.
And that framing, it confirms this is still political quicksand, doesn't it? You mentioned immediate blowback.
Instantaneous. And it really feels like they might have misjudged the climate, even though, as you said, history should have been a warning.
So what does that blowback look like? We talking protests, bad headlines?
All of that, look at the polling.
Yep.
A YouGov survey, end of September, showed a slight overall majority opposed to the scheme, and significantly, about 30% strongly opposed it.
30% strongly opposed. That's a hard base to win over.
It is. And then you have the media reaction, the Daily Mail using terms like East German. Yeah. And a petition against ID cards quickly got, 2.7 million signatures? The political atmosphere is just fundamentally hostile, or at least very, very skeptical.
And it's not just abstract privacy fears, is it? It touches on some really deep constitutional sensitivities, particularly in Northern Ireland.
Absolutely. The First Minister there, Michelle O'Neill, she called the scheme ludicrous. And part of that is rooted in the history, specifically the Good Friday Agreement.
How so? How does a digital ID potentially clash with that?
Well, the concern is if the UK government mandates a single national digital ID, it could be seen as violating the identity optic of the agreement, forcing an endorsement of a British government identity system, potentially undermining the ability for people in Northern Ireland to assert an Irish identity if they choose to.
Right. It shows how identity policy isn't just technical, it's deeply, deeply political and constitutional.
It really is. And the UK is, it's kind of an outlier here. Britain has tried and failed to introduce non-wartime ID schemes multiple times.
While the rest of Europe.
While linked, functional digital ID systems are pretty commonplace across most of Europe now. They use them for everything from healthcare prescriptions to filing taxes, all sorts of administrative tasks.
Even Switzerland, right. Usually quite cautious on privacy.
Exactly. Even privacy hawk Switzerland narrowly approved a state-run EID, though crucially, it's optional and free. That demonstrates that success really requires overcoming these trust deficits first. You can't just mandate it and expect people to comply happily.
Okay, so the politics are clearly explosive. But let's step back. You mentioned the case for coherence. Why is the current situation so bad that we might need something like this, despite the risks?
Because the current process is, frankly, inefficient, it's risky, and it's often inequitable. It's what you might call identity theater.
Identity theater. Explain that.
Well, if you've started a job recently, or tried to rent a property, or even open a bank account, you know the ritual. It's this messy mix of finding your passport, digging out bank statements, maybe a driving license.
And scanning them all, emailing them off to goodness knows where.
Exactly. Repeatedly providing highly sensitive documents to often low-trust third parties. It's a total mess.
And it's not just annoying, is it? You mentioned risk.
Real risk. There was a government survey, 2024, found that 62% of employers mistakenly think a UK driving license proves the right to work here.
62%. Wow.
Yeah. It absolutely does not prove right to work. So the whole system is kind of built on these sloppy assumptions and weak checks. It invites fraud, confusion.
So the need for consolidation seems clear just from an efficiency point of view. What are the other benefits proponents cite?
Well, cutting that massive administrative friction is one, improving security against fraud is another big one, and crucially, ensuring better access to services. Social workers often stress this point.
How so?
They highlight the severe human cost for people who don't have those primary ID documents, like a passport or a driving license. For them, basic interactions with the state or even private services can become almost impossible.
And we saw the tragic consequences of that kind of sloppy approach with the Windrush scandal, didn't we, back in 2018?
That's the starkest example. Long-settled migrants, people who absolutely had the right to live and work here, were persecuted precisely because the fragmented, paper-based system meant they couldn't reliably prove that right decades later.
So, counterintuitively, a well-designed digital ID could actually strengthen people's rights against the state.
It should. A robust system should make it easier for legitimate individuals to assert their rights and defend themselves against arbitrary action, not harder. The sloppiness cuts both ways.
Okay, so if the human cost of doing nothing is potentially that high, let's talk tech. We're not starting completely from scratch here, are we? Is there existing proto-plumbing in the UK system?
That's a really crucial point. No, the UK isn't starting from zero. We have some highly successful, widely used existing components.
Like the NHS app?
The NHS app is ubiquitous now. Then there's the older government gateway, still used for many things, and the newer One Login system.
One login. That's for tax returns and things.
Exactly. Tax returns, driving license applications, even obscure things like getting a permit to dredge for scallops in Wales. It covers a lot. And digital driving licenses are apparently imminent too.
So the technical question isn't really if Britain can write software for this.
No, not at all. The question is, how do you integrate these separate pieces? How do you govern them? How do you broaden the scope in a way that people trust?
And just to clarify the difference, One Login is mostly about proving you are you when you log into a specific government website, right? It's authentication.
Precisely. It's authentication for a specific service.
Whereas this proposed national digital ID would be the underlying reusable credential, the thing that proves facts about you that you can use anywhere.
That's the idea. It's the verified factual claim about who you are, what rights you have, like right to work, or being over 18 that you could potentially reuse across both public and private services with your consent.
And you mentioned the private sector is already kind of forcing this issue anyway.
It is. Look at the online safety regime. It now mandates strong age verification for certain websites.
Which often means
Facial scanning or uploading ID documents verified by private companies. So de facto digital identity checks run by private firms are already creeping in through other legislation, whether this national scheme happens or not.
That's important context. Okay, but this brings us back to the framing. If the tech exists, or could exist, getting the politics and the messaging right is vital. Where are the sources arguing the government is currently getting it wrong?
Well, the first big flaw seems to be tying the flagship goal almost exclusively to illegal migration control.
Even though that might poll well initially.
Even so. Because while it might be politically tempting, it's technically quite a narrow use case, and it practically guarantees public suspicion and likely adoption failure. If people see this primarily as an enforcement tool against them or against certain groups, they'll avoid it.
So how do you overcome that? If the primary driver is enforcement for the government, how do you sell it differently?
You have to pivot strategically. You have to highlight immediate consumer utility. Sell the convenience. Sell the fact you won't need to carry your passport to prove your age or repeatedly submit bank statements for renting a flat.
Make it useful for everyday life first.
Exactly. If people see it unlocking easier access to health services, maybe student discounts, smoother banking KYC, things that benefit them directly, then the adoption barrier drops significantly. Focus on the carrot, not just the stick.
Okay, that's the first challenge. What's the second failure pattern in the framing?
It's this false dichotomy you often hear, that the system has to be either entirely state-run or entirely industry-run.
When the reality, in successful systems elsewhere, is more of a blend.
Exactly. The successful models, like what's emerging from the EU's IIDAS 2.0 framework, they blend roles intelligently.
Okay, so break down how that blending works. You mentioned verifiable credentials, VCs. What are they, in simple terms?
Right. VCs are essentially tamper-proof digital proofs of specific facts about you. Think of them like digital certificates for individual pieces of information.
Issued by who?
Issued by authoritative sources. So, in the successful model, you have public issuers like the DVLA for driving facts, or the NHS for health status, perhaps, or the Home Office for immigration status. They mint these VCs for the facts they hold.
Okay, so the government departments issue the core facts. Then what?
Then, typically, certified private sector wallets, secure apps on your phone, probably help you, the citizen, store these VCs, and crucially, they let you present them with selective disclosure.
Selective disclosure. That sounds important. That's the privacy part.
That's the absolute trust builder. Let's use the classic analogy. Proving your age to buy alcohol.
Okay.
Today, you might show your driving license. The cashier sees your name, address, date of birth, photo, maybe even organ donor status. Far more information than needed.
Right. They only need to know if I'm over 18.
Precisely. With selective disclosure using a VC, your digital wallet would present only the verified fact this person is over 18, cryptographically signed by the issuing authority, like the DVLA. The cashier system verifies the signature, confirms the fact is true, but learns nothing else about you. No name, no address, no date of birth.
That feels genuinely different. Much more privacy-preserving.
It is. And that mechanism, using VCs and selective disclosure, directly tackles the third major failure pattern we see in these projects.
Which is?
Trying to build one big central database containing everyone's information.
The biometric honeypot idea.
Exactly. That's a catastrophic security risk and a privacy nightmare waiting to happen. The safer, modern, privacy-by-design pattern relies on these decentralized credentials.
So when I prove my age, the DAR doesn't need to call back to some giant government server.
Ideally, no. The verification happens by checking the cryptographic proof embedded in the VC itself. Often this can even happen offline, say using a QR code. It avoids creating that single point of failure and surveillance. It significantly lowers the attack surface for hackers and minimizes the state's ability to track your every interaction.
Okay, so if we accept this blended, decentralized, VC-based approach as technically superior, what about the governance? Because tech alone doesn't build trust. You need accountability.
Absolutely critical. You need structural accountability to, as you put it, Windrush-proof the system. And the most vital step there is creating an independent ID commissioner.
Independent. Separate from the existing Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO.
Completely separate and distinct. The ICO deals with data protection generally. This needs a dedicated body focused solely on the unique risks and benefits of digital identity.
But isn't that just creating more bureaucracy? Will Parliament actually fund a powerful independent watchdog like that?
It has to be seen as non-negotiable if they want public trust and especially inclusion. This commissioner needs real teeth. Such as?
Powers to accredit the different parts of the system, the issuers, the wallet providers, powers to mandate deep, regular privacy and security audits, and crucially, the power to run a statutory redress scheme.
Redress. That sounds like the key to the Windrush issue. What does that mean in practice?
It means if the system fails you, if you're wrongly locked out of a job, denied a service because your digital ID doesn't work or contains an error, you don't face years of bureaucratic hell trying to fix it. You have a clear, funded, mandated path to get the problem resolved quickly, overseen by the independent commissioner. It shifts the burden from the citizen back onto the system administrator.
That feels like a fundamental shift. Proactive fixing, not just reactive failure. Okay, what about inclusion? How do you ensure this works for everyone, including people without smartphones or those who are just deeply distrustful of digital tech?
Inclusion has to be baked in from the start, by design. This means mandatory no smartphone options.
Like what? Physical cards? Physical smart cards are one option, maybe printable one-time codes for certain interactions, and very importantly, heavily funded assisted digital routes.
Meaning help in person.
Yes. Using places like post offices or local council offices as hubs where people can get face-to-face help setting up or using their digital ID, and perhaps most critically, the core credentials, proving your basic identity, must be fee-free.
No cost to the citizen.
The government has to absorb the cost, especially for those who don't currently hold primary ID like a passport. Otherwise, it just becomes a tax on the poor or the excluded, which defeats the object.
Okay, makes sense. Now, the elephant in the room, function creep.
Yeah.
The fear that a system introduced for convenience or one specific check gets expanded later for general surveillance or tracking.
This is probably the biggest public fear, and rightly so given history. The only real defense is for the legislature to hard-code purpose limitation onto the face of the initial legislation. meaning the law explicitly states what the ID can and, crucially, cannot be used for. No general purpose tracking, no warrantless phishing expeditions across datasets by police or security agencies using the ID infrastructure.
The government has promised police won't be demanding these digital IDs on the street.
That promise must be legally codified in the bill, not just a policy statement, but black-letter law with very narrow, specific, court-supervised exceptions. That's the only way to prevent mission creep down the line when political priorities change.
Okay, one last angle. The international view. Britain isn't an island digitally. The EU is rolling out its own standardized digital identity wallet framework, IDS 2.0.
Yeah, ignoring that would be, well, digital isolationism. It just doesn't make sense. Pragmatically, the UK system needs interoperability with the EU wallet specifications.
Why? For what purpose?
Because British citizens and businesses will increasingly need to interact digitally with EU entities. Think about students studying abroad, businesses trading, people accessing services across borders. If the UK system uses completely different standards, assurance levels, cryptographic methods, it just creates friction. It risks building a British digital cul-de-sac that ultimately makes life harder for UK citizens.
So pulling all this together, it feels like the UK is definitely choosing how to consolidate identity, not if it should happen. The current system is failing.
That seems right. The pressure from inefficiency, fraud, and even other legislation like online safety is pushing towards some kind of digital solution.
And the sources strongly suggest the fastest path to getting a durable scheme, one that doesn't just get killed off by the next political backlash, is pretty clear.
Seems to be. Embrace the privacy by design tech like VCs and decentralization. Establish that genuinely independent oversight with real redress. And critically, prioritize immediate high-value consumer utility health access, simpler admin, maybe even things like loyalty schemes or discounts over the more controversial enforcement goals, at least initially. Build trust through usefulness.
So we end on this core democratic test, as you called it. The government promises police won't demand these IDs, promises the data won't be abused centrally.
Right. But given that deep need for public trust, which is ultimately more critical for this thing to actually succeed and endure, is it getting the technical design perfect? The decentralized credentials, the cryptography?
Or is it getting those legal guardrails absolutely watertight? The purpose limitations, the independent commissioner, the redress mechanisms, the things that prevent a future government from changing the rules and expanding its scope beyond what we find comfortable today.
That feels like the central question. Where does the enduring trust really come from? The tech or the law?
That's definitely the question for you, the listener, to mull over as this policy inevitably moves from white paper promises to actual legislation. Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.